made clear that Iran must not have a nuclear weapon and that their nuclear program represents a serious threat to international peace and security.
China strongly condemns the U.S. attacks on Iran and the bombing of nuclear facilities under the safeguards of the IAEA.
Thus, the US has confirmed that in order to safeguard their global hegemony, it's prepared to commit any crimes, any violations of international law.
The Iranian regime cannot have a nuclear weapon. Let us be clear. Iran should not escalate.
We have thus strongly and unambiguously condemned the Israeli aggression, expressed solidarity and full support for Iran's inherent and legitimate right of self-defense.
The internationally wanted war criminal Netanyahu succeeded in hijacking U.S. foreign policy, dragging the United States into yet another costly, baseless war.
Thank you to the United States for removing the greatest threat to global security,
and to genuinely work on ensuring the respect of the sovereignty of states and the safety of their critical facilities, including nuclear facilities that are under the IAEA safeguards regime.
This is a pivotal moment for the region. A further spiral of conflict poses serious risks to regional and international peace and stability. Our foremost priority must now be to support de-escalation. We have long made clear that Iran must not have a nuclear weapon and that their nuclear program represents a serious threat to international peace and security. The United States took action last night to alleviate that threat. The United Kingdom did not participate in US or Israeli strikes. But military action alone cannot bring a durable solution to concerns about Iran's nuclear program. My Prime Minister has been clear. We urge Iran now to show restraint, and we urge all parties to return to the negotiating table and find a diplomatic solution which stops further escalation and brings this crisis to an end. It is in the interests of all parties to pursue such a deal. This was the joint call made by my Prime Minister with his French and German counterparts earlier today. Together with our E3 partners, the UK has long pursued a diplomatic solution to address Iran's nuclear escalation. On Friday, alongside E3 and EU colleagues, my Foreign Secretary met Iranian Foreign Minister Araghchi in Geneva to press directly for a return to diplomacy. My Foreign Minister spoke to Foreign Minister Araghchi again today and stressed the urgency of this, and we continue to engage partners across the region. President, the UK reiterates its full support for the IAEA and Director General Grossi for their critical work, professionalism and impartiality. The IAEA and the Non-Proliferation Treaty are key pillars of international security. Threats against IAEA staff and the DG are unacceptable. We urge Iran to cooperate fully with the IAEA. Failure to do so will only further fuel escalation. President, now is the time for de-escalation and a return to diplomacy. It is essential Iran chooses this path.
Yesterday, the United States conducted strikes on 3 Iranian nuclear facilities in Fordo, Natanz, and Isfahan. China strongly condemns the U.S. attacks on Iran and the bombing of nuclear facilities under the safeguards of the IAEA. The actions of the United States seriously violate the purposes and principles of the UN Charter and international law as well as Iran's sovereignty, security, and territorial integrity. It has exacerbated tensions in the Middle East and dealt a heavy blow to the international nuclear non-proliferation regime. The international community must uphold justice and make concrete efforts to cool down the situation and restore peace and stability. In this connection, I wish to put forward 4 appeals. First, we call for an immediate ceasefire and ending the hostilities. In the context of the abrupt escalation of tensions in the Middle East, China is deeply concerned about the risk of the situation getting out of control. The parties to the conflict, Israel in particular, should reach an immediate ceasefire to prevent a spiraling escalation and to resolutely avoid the spillover of the war. The parties concerned should abide by international law, curb the impulse to use force, and avoid exacerbating conflicts and adding fuel to the fire. Second, we call for effective protection of civilians. The ultimate victims of all conflicts are the innocent people. China is deeply saddened by the large number of civilian casualties caused by the conflict. Civilians and civilian facilities must not become targets of military operations. And the bottom line of international humanitarian law must not be breached. Parties to the conflict should place the interests and well-being of the people of the countries in the region above everything else, and make every effort to avoid harm to innocent civilians and refrain from attacking civilian facilities. Third, we call for commitment to dialogue and negotiation. Peace in the Middle East cannot be achieved by the use of force. Dialogue and negotiation are the fundamental way out. At present, diplomatic means to address the Iranian nuclear issue haven't been exhausted, and there's still hope for a peaceful solution. Parties should stay firmly committed to the political settlement of the Iranian nuclear issue and work to bring it back onto the track of a political solution through dialogue and negotiation, with a view to reaching an agreement acceptable to all parties. Fourth, we call for swift actions by the Security Council. The Security Council has the primary responsibility for the maintenance of international peace and security, and cannot stand idly by in the face of a major crisis. Russia, China, and Pakistan have proposed a draft resolution calling for an immediate and unconditional ceasefire, the protection of civilians, respect for international law, and engaging in dialogue and negotiation. We hope that Council members can demonstrate their strong sense of responsibility by jointly supporting the draft resolution to enable the Security Council to fulfill its responsibilities for the maintenance of international peace and security. China stands ready to work with the international community to foster synergy, uphold justice, and make unremitting efforts to restore peace and stability in the Middle East.
Russia condemns in the most decisive terms the irresponsible, dangerous, and provocative actions committed by the USA against the Islamic Republic of Iran, a sovereign member state of the United Nations. As we know, in the early hours on the 22nd of June, the U.S. Air Force, in full cooperation and coordination with the Israeli Air Force, an air force which for over a week, in violation of the basic principles of international law, has been conducting massive strikes on Iranian infrastructure and sites, they together launched an unprovoked missile and bomb attack on 3 nuclear sites in Iran, sites under IAEA safeguards, Fordo, Natanz, and Isfahan. In so doing, Washington yet again demonstrated its complete contempt for the position of the international community. Washington reasserted that to further the interests of its Israeli ally, it's prepared not only to turn a blind eye to the killings of tens of thousands of Palestinian women, children, and older persons, but also to gamble with the safety and well-being of humanity as a whole. Through their actions, the U.S. has opened a Pandora's box. No one knows what new catastrophes and suffering it will bring. In the last 10 days, we heard 3 briefings from the IAEA DG, Mr. Rafael Grossi. He cautioned that strikes on Iranian nuclear infrastructure could have absolutely unpredictable repercussions, as well as that they pose a major threat to both the nuclear safety and security, not only in Iran, but also in the region and the world. Yet Washington is completely unconcerned. It's unconcerned by either the radiological consequences nor the threat to the lives and health of a huge number of people, civilians including women and children in the region and beyond. Washington, much like West Jerusalem, sees itself as the highest judge in the land, vested with the right to mete out justice as it sees fit. Thus, the US has confirmed that in order to safeguard their global hegemony, it's prepared to commit any crimes, any violations of international law. Let me remind you that no one gave the US the authority to act in such a way. We insistently offered our US colleagues our mediation services so as to find a peaceful, mutually agreeable solution surrounding the Iranian nuclear program. Yet our US colleagues are clearly not interested in diplomacy today. Responsibility for this falls squarely on the shoulders of the US leadership, especially given that it is the US leadership that not only publicly acknowledged its responsibility for these actions, but actually flaunted it, demonstrating wholesale disregard for the norms of international law and the UN Charter, as well as Security Council resolutions, including Resolution 487 and Resolution 2231, as well as the Non-Proliferation Treaty, the NPT. Madam President, just 2 days ago, here in this very chamber, we heard from many delegations, including the closest allies of the US. They called for a de-escalation and for the settlement of differences around the negotiating table. Yet our US colleagues yet again ignored this position, the position of the entire international community, following Israel's lead, instead of checking Israel, instead of forcing it to halt the spiral of escalation. Today, we once again will be hearing from the US representative. We'll be hearing cynical statements about readiness to return to the negotiations table, as if there were no strikes using heavy payload bombs on Iran. Clearly, this is being done to hypercritically subsequently portray Tehran as the party that spoiled the negotiations process, the party that's supposedly undermining stability in the Middle East. Yet we believe that none of our sensible colleagues in the international community will believe our US colleagues anymore, much like they won't believe their attempts to convince the Security Council that Iran was trying to acquire nuclear weapons. Let me remind you that back in March, high-ranking US intelligence officials said that the US does not have information about Tehran's attempts to develop military nuclear capabilities. I imagine that many are getting a nagging sense of déjà vu today. Let me remind you that back in 2003, in this very chamber, the US Secretary of State, Colin Powell, waved around a test tube, justifying Washington's plans to invade the territory of another sovereign state, only to having waged decades of chaos onto its people to not find any WMDs there. Today's situation is no different in substance to the one we saw in 2003. Again, we're being asked to believe the US's fairy tales to once again inflict suffering on millions of people living in the Middle East. This cements our conviction that history has taught our US colleagues nothing. We regret that today some of you in this room didn't and cannot muster up the courage to call a spade and to condemn Washington's actions. And it's very strange to be participating in this theatre of the absurd, this cynical theatre. We had the representative of the UK calling on Iran to exercise restraint, a country which was subjected to an unprovoked attack, which was bombed. It had its nuclear sites bombed, as if it were Iran, not Israel, and the US that was escalating the situation as much as possible. They're calling on Iran to exercise restraint. This is something other council members are doing. We've seen a lot of hypocrisy in this room, but this takes the biscuit. This is a surprising example of hypocrisy on the part of those who, over the last few days, has been whipping up tensions regarding Resolution 2231, which will soon expire. Madam President, throughout the last week, we witnessed a new, highly dangerous wave of escalation. Last night, the situation became wholly unprecedented in nature. The radiological repercussions of the US attacks remain to be assessed, and we're counting on the IAEA and its Director General to issue a clear-cut, professional and impartial analysis of the situation, including by presenting an objective report at the emergency session of the Board of Governors of the IAEA. Yet it's already clear that strikes on Iran's nuclear sites including those conducted by one of the NPT's depositories, the US, that these attacks amount to a colossal attack on the global NPT regime, non-proliferation regime. They not only deal a blow to the authority of the IAEA, they also deal a blow to the entire system of inspections and control implemented by the agency. They also destroy the basis of the system of international cooperation, including de facto risking casting us back into the era of nuclear risks. Seemingly, this is what Washington and Western Jerusalem are seeking. The Russian Federation, as a responsible state and a permanent member of the Security Council, cannot abide such a scenario. We cannot support it. Iran, as per the NPT, has the right to develop its civilian nuclear program. Overnight, the US has de facto nullified years of diplomatic efforts aimed at ensuring compliance with this fundamental principle. Agreeing with the legality of US actions is tantamount to throwing out all of the international community's advances on this front. And since we talked about the importance of the NPT and the global non-proliferation regime today, I'd like to remind you that Israel has not yet acceded to the NPT. Thus, there cannot be a comprehensive IAEA inspections program vis-à-vis Israel. As for Iran, in keeping, I'd like to remind you that Israel has not acceded to the NPT, so no comprehensive IAEA inspections program vis-à-vis Israel is being implemented. As for Iran, Iran was and remains the most monitored IAEA state in the world. And instead of supporting Iran, we're getting bombardments of this country, including its civilians. This is a country, and this is being done by a country which has in principle refused to sign the NPT. This is an outrageous, cynical situation. It's very strange that the IAEA DG did not say a word about this, nor did he call on Israel to join the NPT, not once. Madam President, I think that everyone in this room can see full well that unless we stop the escalation, the Middle East will find itself on the verge of a large-scale conflict with unpredictable consequences for the entire international security system. Plus, the entire world might end up on the verge of a nuclear disaster. We call for an immediate cessation of aggressive actions by Israel and the US, restraint on the part of all parties, and return into the fold of international diplomacy and the negotiations process. Yet, calls on the part of UN Security Council members are not enough. Based on the provisions of the UN Charter, and these are the very same provisions that those who are hypercritically staying silent today call for the respect for in other cases. On the basis of these provisions, the Security Council is simply duty-bound to craft a collective decision which would make unacceptable strikes on Iranian nuclear infrastructure, which are under IAEA safeguards. To this end, we need, first and foremost, a clear-cut legal and political assessment of what happened. For all those who are not pursuing any hidden agendas nor double standards, this is patently obvious. To this end, the Russian Federation, China and Pakistan have prepared and disseminated this morning a short and balanced UN Security Council draft resolution, including a call for an immediate and unconditional ceasefire and for a search for a diplomatic solution surrounding the Iranian nuclear program. The text reflects the positions of an overwhelming majority of Security Council members expressed at our meetings held on the 13th and 20th of June. We're counting on the support of all Security Council members to ensure that the Council can, as soon as possible, send a signal about the need to immediately end the violence, something that the Secretary General again called for, inter alia. Unless the Security Council takes a clear-cut and principled position, further escalation is inevitable. We call on all Security Council members to adopt a responsible approach and to support the proposed draft.
Last evening, U.S. military strikes targeted nuclear facilities in Fordo, Natanz, and Isfahan, with the aim of dismantling Iran's nuclear enrichment capacity and stopping the nuclear threat posed by the world's foremost state sponsor of terror. This operation sought to eliminate a long-standing but rapidly escalating source of global insecurity and to aid our ally Israel in our inherent right of collective self-defense, consistent with the UN Charter. For 40 years, the Iranian government has called for death to America and death to Israel, and posed a constant menace to the peace and security of its neighbors, the United States, and the entire world. Iran has attacked Israel with hundreds of ballistic missiles and through terrorist proxies. For decades, Iran has been responsible for misery and countless deaths across the Middle East. Iran's government and its proxies have also killed numerous Americans, including American service members in Iraq and Afghanistan. In recent weeks, Iranian officials have intensified their hostile bluster and rhetoric. Iran has long obfuscated its nuclear weapons program and stonewalled good faith efforts in recent negotiations. Madam President, the time finally came for the United States, in the defense of its ally and in the defense of our own citizens and interests, to act decisively. The Iranian regime cannot have a nuclear weapon. Let us be clear. Iran should not escalate. As President Trump said, any Iranian attack, direct or indirect, against Americans or American bases will be met with devastating retaliation. To fulfill its core mission of maintaining international peace and security, this Council must call upon the Iranian regime to end its 47-year effort to eradicate the State of Israel, to terminate its drive for nuclear weapons, to stop targeting American citizens and interests, and to negotiate peace in good faith for the prosperity and security of the Iranian people and all other states in the region. Madam President, a member state here today cast aspersions about hypocrisy and raised the forthcoming meeting on UN Security Council Resolution 2231. In that regard, I would point out that the recent IAEA report on verification and monitoring of Iran's noncompliance with obligatory nuclear safeguards shows clearly that Iran has been continuing to accelerate its nuclear activities without any credible civilian justification. We look forward to discussing the implications of this report and its broader implications on Tuesday, when the Secretariat briefs on the report on implementation of UNSCR 2231.
When the Security Council met for the second time last Friday, following Israel's wanton continuing aggression and unprovoked strikes against Iran, many members warned the international community of this grave violation of the UN Charter and the risk of dangerous escalation. We have heard the same today around the table from Council members as well as the Secretary General and other briefers. But tragically, developments over the past 24 hours have only confirmed those warnings. And it is unfortunate that the universal calls for de-escalation and a peaceful resolution of this crisis through dialogue have remained unheeded. From the outset, Pakistan has adopted a principled position on these developments, a position based entirely on international law and the UN Charter. We have thus strongly and unambiguously condemned the Israeli aggression, expressed solidarity and full support for Iran's inherent and legitimate right of self-defense in conformity with the Charter of the United Nations, denounced the unlawful Israeli unilateral strikes on IAEA-safeguarded Iranian nuclear facilities, called for bringing an end to this aggression, advocated cessation of hostilities and for reverting to dialogue and diplomacy for a peaceful, lasting settlement of the Iranian nuclear issue. In recent days, Pakistan's leadership, including the Deputy Prime Minister and Foreign Minister, has remained actively engaged in promoting those objectives through numerous and continuing contacts with leaders of other countries and our partners across regions, all in the interest of preserving international peace and security and in fulfillment of our responsibility as a member of the Security Council. The Council of Foreign Ministers of the OIC meeting in Istanbul has echoed the same call for ending the aggression and supporting de-escalation and a peaceful settlement. It is in this context that we are seriously concerned by the recent developments that have further heightened tensions. Pakistan has condemned the US strikes on Iranian nuclear facilities, which come on the heels of a series of brazen attacks by Israel on the nuclear sites. Let me recall that specific targeting of nuclear facilities under IAEA safeguards constitutes a clear breach of international law, the IAEA statute, multiple IAEA resolutions, as well as Security Council Resolution 487. And according to Article 25 of the Charter, the members of the United Nations agree to accept and carry out the decisions of the Security Council in accordance with the Charter. That responsibility to carry out the decisions of the Security Council is heaviest with the members of this Council, particularly the permanent members in the first place. Madam President, we are deeply alarmed by the escalating situation. The sharp rise in tensions and violence as a result of the Israeli aggression and unlawful actions is profoundly disturbing. Any further escalation risks catastrophic consequences for the region and beyond. Pakistan stands in solidarity with the government and brotherly people of Iran during this challenging time. Madam President, these attacks set a dangerous precedent and pose a grave threat to the safety and security of populations across the region, and indeed the world. As the body entrusted with primary responsibility for the maintenance of international peace and security, the Security Council must act urgently and decisively. We share a collective responsibility to, first, unequivocally reject and condemn the attacks against the Islamic Republic of Iran since 13th of June, being in clear contravention of international law and the UN Charter. Threat or use of force must never be condoned. Article 2.4 is crystal clear in this regard, and so is Article 51. Second, denounce the attacks on IAEA safeguarded nuclear facilities, which violate Security Council and IAEA resolutions as well as international humanitarian law. Third, reaffirm the obligation to protect civilian lives and property on both sides. All parties must adhere fully to international law, particularly international humanitarian law. Fourth, call for an immediate cessation of hostilities and a complete ceasefire. Fifth, promote urgent recourse to dialogue and diplomacy consistent with the purposes and principles of the UN Charter to find a peaceful and lasting resolution to the Iranian nuclear issue. Madam President, in pursuit of these objectives, Pakistan has joined China and Russia in circulating a draft resolution. Among other things, this resolution calls for an immediate and unconditional ceasefire, urges all parties to refrain from further escalation, demands the urgent protection of civilians and civilian infrastructure, and supports a diplomatic path forward on the Iranian nuclear issue that is acceptable to all parties. And listening to similar concerns and priorities expressed by many of the Council members today, we sincerely hope that the draft resolution will receive the Council's support, enabling it to respond with unity and resolve urgently and effectively in line with the gravity of the situation. And Pakistan stands ready to engage constructively with all Council members in this regard. Madam President, the Middle East, already burdened by prolonged instability, history of Israeli illegal occupation, and continued denial of the Palestinian right to self-determination and statehood cannot absorb another crisis. We must act now to prevent the situation from spiraling further out of control. History has taught us that the use of force and unilateral military actions only deepen conflicts and entrench divisions, with tragic human and humanitarian consequences. Dialogue and diplomacy